Where I go. Hi.
Right. Hello.
Good evening, joyous Zappadan.
Welcome to night 3. Tonight, we're doing what I would say is kind of a deep cut.
I think we picked one out of left field.
We did. I don't want to give it away right away.
No.
I love it so much.
Should we make them wait?
Well, I had every reason to pick this one because it is one of my favorites.
It's so good, and it's Orchestral Favorites.
Official release number 27, released on May 4th, Star Wars Day.
Perfect.
1979. Orchestral Favorites, recorded in 1975. There was a bit of a lag. We'll talk about that closer to the end of the video, though.
Sounds good.
All right, so let's get started. Only 5 tracks.
But 5 good ones.
5 great ones.
Solid.
About 35 minutes long. Mm-hmm. Standard single LP length for Frank. Most single LPs are about 45. Frank usually averaged around 35 minutes.
Yeah.
He was economical like that. However, for LPs, that guaranteed better fidelity.
Definitely.
Todd Rundgren would load his LPs up and then have a thing in his sleeve saying, record it, put it on tape, so that you only have to drag the needle across it once, so you make sure it sounds good forever.
I like your mention of Todd Rundgren.
Well, he's your birthday buddy.
Yes, he is.
That's right.
And Meryl Streep. I'm in good company.
I got Alexander Hamilton, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we dive on in?
Let's dive on in. Orchestral Favorites opens with Strictly Gentile.
Love it. So good. I'm such a musical theater geek, and this track just feels like you can see it play out on stage. You can hear it. You can hear like the movement, the musicality. Absolutely. And I can see it as being like a big number, like a big number you would see in like an old Marx Brothers movie. It's
Oh, well, now you got me thinking of them. Well, it really does have that feel. Mm-hmm. This is not the premiere of Strictly Gentile, though. It first appeared on 200 Motels as the big closing musical number sung by Theodore Beikel.
It fits.
Flo and Eddie and the Jimmy Carl Blacks in it and everything. Melodically, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so one thing I really like about this is the instrumentation on it. Mm-hmm. You've got a 37-piece orchestra credited as the...
So crazy.
All right, so get this. Credited as the Emuka Electric Orchestra.
Yeah.
Because, why not?
Did you know this was his 3rd album with a big orchestra like that?
Yes, what were the first 2? Trebek. Alexa Trebek.
Gosh, now I'm blanking.
Well, one goes with your biscuits.
Lumpy Gravy.
Right.
Now I want biscuits and gravy.
And the other one's the one that it's the one that we're probably going to name drop the most tonight, and that's 200
Motels.
Yeah,
yep.
200 Motels.
There we go.
So 200 Motels was this piece, this musical suite he conceived in the early 70s.
Uh-huh.
Its name coming from Life on the Road, staying in, he estimated, about 200 motels. Not that the music itself has any relation to Life on the Road, but the different themes are titled, touring can make you crazy, this town is a sealed tuna sandwich, stuff like that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that when we talk about Bogus Pomp. But Strictly Gentile is from the 200 Motels finale, and what a gorgeous piece it is.
Super beautiful. Can we move on to the next one, though? It's my favorite.
Oh, you're in a hurry.
Yeah, I'm not in a hurry. I'm just excited.
Any parting thoughts on Strictly Gentile?
No,
other
it's
than
just
that,
a
it's
solid
pretty.
track. It's really beautiful. It's classical music at its finest.
Mm-hmm. If anyone ever had doubts about him as a composer, that's the song I would show and say this is much like Peaches on Regalia, as to show off his instrumental skills.
They remind me of each other.
Right, they're very anthemic in that way.
Definitely.
Cool. Next is what is clearly your favorite.
Pedro's Dowry is for sure my favorite track
So
on
tell
the
me
record.
about it. Why is it your favorite?
I love it because,
I love that your pants were on fire to talk about it, too. It's
I'm not
cute.
even wearing pants and they're super on fire.
That's the beauty of YouTube, kids. No pants.
No pants. So like I mentioned, total just, I'm just a theater geek in general. But this actually was conceived as a ballet. And you can kind of tell it's reminiscent of like Peter and the Wolf, which I know every 4th grader has listened to. And it's pointed out that the different instruments play the different characters
Mm-hmm.
and how that tells the story. And Pedro's Dowry, I feel like, it is so, like, it really echoes that sentiment.
And
you
it's
have...
and it's a program piece.
It's fully a program piece, but you have, like... I mean, the story is very simple. It's just, you know, a woman waiting by a window for her lover to come. And then there's, you know, at some point an ashtray is flipped over, and at some point they have sex, which is great.
During the lovemaking, they knock over the ashtray. That's
the one
lore.
leads to the other.
Yeah. It happens.
But I love how simple it is, and Frank really reveled in the simple things in life, and he loved to just show things as they were. And you know, for an album that is classical music, which is often associated with being, you know,
high art.
High art, exactly.
The
Highbrow, or
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. As being inaccessible, I love that it was tied with a theme that is so accessible. Everybody knows the feeling of waiting for someone they love.
Yeah.
And I love that. It's so beautiful. All the little, just the little flits, and you hear all these different instruments, and they all tell the story. I love that.
So I totally like the point that you made, that Frank, who knew how to orchestrate, who knew music theory, and frankly, it's hard to say frankly while talking about him.
I think I said let me be frank the other night.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, anyway, frankly, he learned those rules simply so he could break them.
Yes.
Kind of, you know, but the geniuses of film did that. You know, Eisenstein did that. Zappa did that with music. The literary geniuses did that too.
That's
Like
great.
Burroughs did that. So Zappa functioned in that same way. And in doing so, what he did was he took the high art and brought it to the masses. He took the patrician art and gave it to the plebes.
Absolutely.
And he, by blending high art with sort of lowbrow humor, where it's almost like the Meanwhile in New Jersey photo spread that he did in Hustler in '84.
So great. Yeah.
Or like Thangfish. It's a night at the opera, but it's an NC-17 night at the opera.
You know, I want Thingfish to be made so badly.
Well, yeah.
Anything else about Pedro's Dowry?
No, it's musically, you hear it again. You first hear it as far back as '68. I mean, Frank had that idea of conceptual continuity, the big note, the idea of his work all being one simultaneous piece. He really does reward the lifelong listener.
He does.
So if you'd caught him in '68 and he'd performed that then, 11 years later you're hearing it on vinyl, realized by a full orchestra. That's pretty cool.
That is super cool.
All right, so the next piece,
Closing out
side A,
Yeah.
is Naval Aviation in Art with the question mark.
That question mark.
Its title came from a photo spread in a magazine depicting that very thing, life on the naval base, in paintings. A romantic visage of the American Empire, which, I mean, that's Frank. That's Frank in a nutshell right there. The idea of romanticizing the horrors of war on canvas.
And it's a short track. It's only it's less than 2 minutes long.
And it's an eerie one. It matches what the title suggests.
I love the strings on it, though. It's so great. It's short, but it's super sweet.
Where you get those long, sustained fermata notes, and often in very dissonant, arranged in very dissonant, unpleasant harmonies, atonal.
I like that Frank wasn't afraid to do that. Not everything had to be pretty. He composed his fair share of beautiful, beautiful music.
He would call that putting eyebrows on it.
Right, he wasn't afraid to make it a little bit weird or a little bit dissonant. And
sure. That ran deep for him. That was the influence of Edgard Varese.
Agreed.
So when he was a kid, he read this record review describing Edgard Varese as the worst music I'd ever heard. So Frank saw that in the review and said, "Oh, I got to go get it." And here's a picture of Varese. This is from the cover of one of the best books out there on Frank by Kevin Courier. He's a Canadian writer. That's Varese.
That hair.
I'm thinking this is the pic. So, according to the legend, Frank wrote an article called Edgard Varese, Idol of My Youth, where he tells the story of reading the record review. So, in the real Frank Zappa book, supposedly it's that it was the worst music the guy'd ever heard. In the article he wrote in the 60s, he said that it was about Sam Goody record store, and that Sam Goody was so good at selling records he could even sell a record by Edgard Varese. Either way, Frank looked him up and came across, he said, a picture where I swore the guy was a mad scientist, is what he described. And I'm thinking it was this picture. There weren't too many pictures of Varese back in the day.
He does look like...
mane of hair and all that.
Especially with the muffins.
Well, yeah, the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen. You got Barbecue Bob behind him as the sous chef.
Nice.
That is the subversive world of Zappa. That is a dangerous kitchen, though. Don't call OSHA. But the one thing I want to say about naval aviation and art is it does show the influence of Edgard Varese, where you have these atonal harmonies, these long, drawn-out notes, punctuated by really short but frenzied rhythmic phrases.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a lot going on for such a short piece.
I agree.
And that closes out side A.
Yeah.
All right, next is side B, starting with Duke of Prunes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a song that we first heard on Absolutely Free.
Right.
By the Mothers of Invention. So,
and it has lyrics.
Right, yeah. Those first couple albums are beloved. They're like universally beloved by all Zappa fans. And sort of like after Uncle Meat, all bets are off.
Right.
So it is a hark back to that golden era. But we're hearing it in a way we've never heard before, with this majestic 37-piece orchestra, an amazing drum pattern by Terry Bozzio.
The drums are
killer
on this one.
He's a kid at this point. He's like 23 years old,
my
something
gosh.
like that.
Frank had some... I know we talked about this before, but
well, he plucked him straight out of the conservatory.
Amazing drummers, yeah.
So, what's your take on Duke of Prunes?
It's just such a great track. I loved hearing it in the instrumental version because I've heard it more frequently, the version with lyrics in it. So it is nice to be able, I'm a vocalist, so I'm not one to often be like, oh, I'm fine to drop the lyrics, because that's my part. But I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed hearing it. I enjoyed being able to just kind of focus on the music and the instruments and the musicality and
for sure. And
just how he weaves in these different parts and lets them all shine. He was such a wonderful composer in that way. Nothing was ever lost and nothing ever felt supplemental. It all felt like everything had its time and place, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Frank once said if he didn't feel like he had to get his music on the radio, he wouldn't have bothered with lyrics. Hearing the Duke of Prunes stripped of words,
fine.
You hear this beautiful melody. It is actually an old tune. It's from one of the first films he scored. I forget whether it's World's Greatest Sinner or the other one, the Western. But it's something dating back to before the Mothers. So these really are his orchestral favorites. He's got history with these tunes.
Right.
A long history. And that blistering guitar solo.
So great.
It's the only overdub on the album. So all of it was recorded live in a recital hall at UCLA before an audience. That must have been stellar to witness. But
oh my God, yeah.
But the guitar solo, he said that he wanted the feedback. He said he always loved the idea of having this Hendrix feedback-drenched mess. He was all about intentionally creating ugliness. He said he wanted a feedback-drenched solo with an orchestra. He said he couldn't quite do that acoustically, so it was overdubbed and floated in later.
I don't think you'd find a lot of other classical composers wanting to create a mess.
Right.
Everything else in classical music is so clean. It's so clean.
Right, and we talked about this with Roxy, we talked about it with Hot Rats, with Jazz Fusion. Again, to go back to his contemporaries, you're not going to hear a guitar solo like that on a Genesis record or on a record by Mahavishnu Orchestra or any of those other prog rock acts.
Nope.
Or any of those other classical, like Rick Wakeman was not going to have a guitar solo on the Arthur album that sounded like that, you know?
Right.
So Dave Davies maybe, but I mean, that guitar solo had eyebrows on it.
For
it's
sure.
Just so good. Wonderful drum pattern. And really ahead of its time with that marriage of rock and classical.
Agreed.
With the funky backdrop instead of
that
stoic European thing.
He was such a king of fusion. I know we've talked about, in past, for past Zappadan nights, we've talked about him, with funk and soul and bringing that together in kind of the rock milieu. And this is a classical, but he does have those rock elements. He's got Terry Bozzio with just this
a straight up
killer,
rock beat.
Yeah, absolutely killer rock drums. You have a guitar, and not a classical guitar. You have a rock guitar tone, and just integrating
and you're hearing
that.
feedback, like something that 10 years earlier they were trying to avoid on rock records. It was a mistake. You did not want that sound. And now here it is breaking its way into the classical world. I mean, Zappa does not get the credit he deserves for punching through the walls.
Agreed.
Of bringing sort of, this like dirty, hairy, barefoot hippie guy in jeans.
I like that.
With a guitar slung around his neck and a Winston in his hand.
That's very true.
I mean, he brought himself to the recital hall. That was punk as fuck, man.
Yeah.
So,
should we slide into the last track?
Yes, there's a lot of history to this one too. Bogus Pomp. So Bogus Pomp is a shortened version of the 200 Motels suite. Here it is, a 13-minute rendition of it. What's your take? It's a lot of different pieces in one.
It is. It's the longest track on the album, but it doesn't feel like the longest track.
It's like 5 suites in one.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the the most beautiful things about it is that it is all these different movements. It feels like movements, and that's an important part of classical music are the movements. And again, I know I've said this before, but I just love how he's able to weave in all of these different touches, all these different instruments. You're hearing oboe, and you're hearing, all these, great reed instruments and brass and a synthesizer in a way that I didn't think it was a synthesizer, but it's a synthesizer.
And then very obviously drum set drumming, not orchestral drumming like a big bass drum and a snare, but a drum set.
Yes, a full-on drum set. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. It's such a great track. One
of my favorite things that you hear in it, there's so much to enjoy. The tuna sandwich suite is probably my favorite. I wish it went on longer. That's like my only gripe about any of Zappa's strongest melodies is he doesn't let you fall in love with them.
Nope. Yeah.
He splashes the water in your face right away. But there's a bit somewhere where the violins are doing this harmony. And it doesn't sound like classical, and it doesn't sound like rock. It sounds like East European, like Hungarian folk or something.
Absolutely.
And it's just it's as much a melting pot of influences as Cream. Like you're hearing the rock influence, you're hearing the influence of Stravinsky, Varese. You're also hearing the influence of Bartók, of these East European composers who Zappa really admired. The rule breakers.
Right.
And that was the thing about Frank is he learned the rules so he could break them.
I think that's awesome.
To make music that wasn't boring.
Yeah.
And I think the result is a fantastic record.
And none of it is boring. None of it's stuffy. It's classical music, but it's not stuck up. It's accessible. Right. It's super. It's everybody can listen to it.
I would say it's probably overlooked owing to its title. Do not let the title fool you. This is not a night with Mozart. This is not a night with Mozart, friends. This is a rocking night at the concert hall.
I agree.
Any parting thoughts about this before we cap off with a little touch about the Leather Saga?
Just don't overlook it. Historically I would have been like
keeping
so
it in frame.
Historically I would have been super quick to pass